And welcome to Betwixt the Books, where we review romance books and only romance books, except for when Gretchen goes off script and talks about nonfiction. But we're a romance channel, so we're here today to talk about the new Katie Roberts book that just came out this week, which is Radiant Sin, I believe, yes? Yes, I don't have a physical copy because we read digital arcs. I am part of Katie's Patreon, so I get a physical one eventually, but it always comes later than the book comes out. So I don't have a physical one to show you. I believe it's like pink with a cup on the cover, if I'm correct. I'll put a picture. There's a picture. Editing me, put a picture. Look at it. I'm gonna move it all around and be fancy. If you didn't know, this is the fourth book in the Dark Olympus series. Obviously, this far into a series, it will be really hard to talk about the plot of this novel without spoiling things that happened in the previous ones. So if you haven't read the other Dark Olympus books, I don't know why you're looking at a video that's like the fourth book in a series, but if you're doing it, I'm letting you know that's the case. So you could get spoiled for the previous books in the series. Just be aware. We do have reviews up of all of the previous ones. Gretchen reviewed Neon Gods, and then we reviewed the last two books in the series together, and I think we're going to continue reviewing the series in general, so just know that if you want to hear our thoughts on all of them, you can, and always come back. But yes, the previous ones will be linked above as we're talking about them. They'll pop up if you want to see those. But again, if you don't want spoilers for the previous books, it's the fourth book in a series, man. Like, we can only do so much about not spoiling you on that one. We will be mostly spoiler-free in this review. The only spoiler thing that we will talk about, we will let you know ahead of time, so if you don't want to hear that, we'll put that away, but you always get our opinions and some of our thoughts without us talking about the specifics of this novel in any of our reviews.
Okay, so if you're still here, I'm going to talk about the plot of this book, or at least, the beginning of it, and it does have to do with stuff directly happening in the last book, so last warning. Okay, so this book, our leads in this one are Apollo and Cassandra, and they work together, essentially. Apollo, as one of the 13, has a bajillion offices. He is tasked with kind of protection and intelligence for Olympus, and Cassandra is his, number one assistant person. And what you realize very quickly is that these two are very attracted to each other. One of the first things you get from Apollo's point of view is that he is staring at her butt when he should be listening to Zeus tell him what to do. So there is a lot of unresolved feelings. However, they have never acted upon them, because for Cassandra, on her part, her parents once tried to murder a member of the 13, and so she's kind of seen like a pariah and an outcast, and nobody really thinks much of her, and she doesn't think much of the 13. And on Apollo's side, he's her boss and a member of the 13. So he thinks it's just doubly inappropriate to, in that power dynamic, kind of make advances on her. The other person, of course, not realizing that the attraction is mutual. In the last book, we learned that the shield surrounding Olympus is failing. And in this book, Apollo and Cassandra go not quite undercover, but on a mission to a house party, because that's what happens in Olympus, to try to learn more about what may or may not be happening to that shield. In the last book, there were some characters that came kind of out of nowhere, the Minotaur, Theseus, and they competed to be the next Ares, which they lost. But now they're hanging out in Olympus and saying to Zeus, hey man, we know potentially what's going on. If you let us be citizens of Olympus, we'll tell you what we know. They're not being very forthcoming. There's definitely some dark shenanigans going on. So Apollo and Cassandra go to this house party the Minotaur is throwing to try to get more of a handle on what they're doing there. Needless to say, there is only one bed.
Gretchen and I both agreed that this was probably the weakest installment in the series that we've read so far. If you've watched our other reviews, you know that my favorite was Eros and Psyche, and I believe Gretchen's favorite was the last one between Helen, Achilles, and Patroclus. That was a trio. It isn't necessarily like a bad book. Like at no point am I gonna say like, oh, don't read that series, the fourth book sucks so hard, like it like drops off a cliff. Like I'm not gonna say that, but it definitely isn't my favorite. It's probably 3 stars. It's a book that I feel like most of the problems were that she was like trying to maneuver towards the end game of the series overall, and a lot of the things that needed to happen here for the overarching plot of the series kind of overshadowed the actual like romance element to it, and that was like not as strong as I would like it to be, which is why I feel like, again, 3 stars. It's fine, it's good. Political machinations going on, there was some thrillery elements going on, it was fun, but like I wanted more from it. And again, it's a slow burn because these characters are dancing around each other, like especially for Katie Roberts, because Katie Roberts is usually pretty good about her characters getting together very early on. I think Gretchen and I timed it that like there isn't a sex scene until at least halfway through the book, if not farther than that. So like be aware of that going into this, that it's not as much smut as you might be expecting from a Katie Robert book. But it's all right. It's okay. It's like 3 stars. It was a book.
I think one of the things that's unfair with this book is that Michaela and I have enjoyed the last 2 books so much that even a book that is just fine is a little bit disappointing, and that is definitely what I felt with this book. I had issues with some of the characters. I don't think these are the best characters I've ever seen her write. There were definitely some issues with the plot, both with believability and also the way that certain elements were weighted. But, and this is why you're going to want to stick around for what we have to say, for being my least favorite book of the series, it absolutely made me the most excited for the next book in the series I think I've been this entire time. Like, I've enjoyed this series and I've looked forward to the next book, but this has to be the first time that I'm like, I am in desperate need of book 5, guys. Desperate need. So despite the fact that I have all these issues, and thankfully Michaela and I agree mostly on all of them, so you will hear about all of these things, it's like a really weird dichotomy, so I really don't know what to do with this book, and I'm really glad that we're going to talk about it. But absolutely, this is not the best entry in the series. It's very uneven in a couple of different ways. Definitely like 3 stars from me as well. But that means that we have a lot to talk about.
Okay. Our biggest complaint, and I mentioned it briefly in my overall review there, was that this book was like way more plot than romance, which is not normal for a romance book. I feel like most books try to have some sort of plot. Obviously, it isn't just all kissing all the time, but this was like so much political plot, like so much of what was going on in the world. And again, it felt like it was more of like a placeholder book that needed to be used to move the plot forward than it really was romance between Cassandra and Apollo. Now, yes, obviously Cassandra and Apollo are there and they're kissing and you get to see them get together, but most of their relationship building was done before we started this book. They've been working together, I think, for 5 years by the time that we start this book, so you're watching as these 2 characters who apparently have been pining over each other for 5 years just finally kiss already. And they only have like a week left to do it, so they're like, well, if I have to, I guess we're gonna, like, can't fake date without without also real kissing. So, like, there's that. There's those shenanigans, the fake dating trope, there's only one bed trope, like this finally getting together thing. There's like a lot of like sort of fanficky like tropes that get put in there that are also like very popular. Like, if you like that trope, like it's there. It's definitely there. But, like, I wanted more. Like I like Katie Roberts' books for her relationship. She does interesting things with her characters, and I feel like this, like, is very out of character for her as an author, the way that this book was, because it was so much plot and not enough of the characters, especially when you're going into a romance book. This felt like a political thriller that was, like, tucked in the middle of a romance category that had some sex just inside of it sometimes.
Making this even funnier is that, I mean, this is a romance series called Dark Olympus. Every single time I see this series on a list, it's like super dark, super spicy, like don't read this book if you like super, super dark and spicy sex scenes. And is that the case in the first book, Neon God? Sure. There's a public orgy. Things happen. But we talked about this in the second book where we were like, oh, all of a sudden we just have cute Cinnamon Bun who in the past murdered some people, and like a very curvy, strong, independent woman who come together and like fall in love. And it's like a very big tonal shift between book 1 and book 2. And Michaela and I were talking about this, that it just seems to be kind of escalating along that way, that like this might be called Dark Olympus, but like that bit, the big tagline that seems to be selling that first book and getting people into the series, is not necessarily what's happening as the series progresses. Now, I may come to eat those words after book 5 because, again, some things may be happening there, but in terms of these 4 books that we've gotten so far, like from Neon Gods to the rest of them, it's been a very different tonal shift. So that's been funny to watch.
Connected, but also different. We're going to talk about the characters now, and I'll talk about Apollo, and then Gretchen's going to talk about something connected with Cassandra, and then obviously all of these are myth retellings, right? Where Katie Robert is like, we're going to retell a myth, but we're going to give them the happy ending that they didn't get. In this case, it's Apollo and Cassandra, and it feels more like this is following the Cassandra myth. It doesn't really follow any of the Apollo myths, other than the fact that Apollo is linked with Cassandra in this way. But we both have read a couple different Greek retelling stories that are like more overarching, and Apollo is a very interesting character and most often is written as an asshole of some kind, a misogynist of some kind, and the only character trait that this Apollo has is that he is a good dude, solid dude, not mean or manipulative in any way. My guy is good and nice, and that's it. There's nothing else to him. He doesn't have any interests or anything really. We don't know why he wanted to be part of the 13, other than that people in his family in the past have been different members of the 13, and it's sort of expected of him. He doesn't seem to be even particularly good at the job that he is given. Like, he's supposed to be this person who gets all of this lore and inside information. And, like, one of the first scenes is them going to this house party, and she asks, hey, did you get a blueprint of the house? And he goes, no, I couldn't get one. There wasn't one at City Hall, and it looks like they hired contractors from the Undercity, and they don't want to talk to me, so that was a dead end. And I'm like, your whole job is getting information, and you couldn't even get a floor plan for the house? Like what is this Apollo? Who is he? What is he doing? Like, it didn't feel like a whole character. He felt, like, so one-dimensional, which is fine, but again, like, anything. Give us anything to work with. Apollo in myth is such a, like, weird guy doing all sorts of things. Like, there's so many different things that you could put into this Apollo that he just doesn't have. Like, it could have been any other guy. Like, it didn't need to be Apollo, you know?
So in terms of Cassandra, I actually did quite enjoy her character. She is someone who has a complicated past, and she is very worried and, like, not into the whole 13 Olympus situation for good reason. She is very much a very similar character to Psyche from book 2, which is that she's underestimated, but she's absolutely, like, whip smart. She has a different set of smarts in some ways than Psyche has, but that kind of, like, strong, underestimated woman that, you know, is ready to save the day when duty calls. Or, you know, she loves a boy and he be dumb and she has to save him. Thing that began to bother me with Cassandra's character, and this is the first time it's happened in this series, and again, like Michaela said, and it's quite obvious, these books are based on myths. But the really refreshing thing about this series is that it doesn't take those myths as gospel and uses parts of those characters to build a whole new world and a whole new take on this, everything that's happening. And towards the end of the book, and this is not the spoiler section, so I'm going to be opaque about this, but elements of the Cassandra myth really assert themselves. And to be brief, the Cassandra myth is that Cassandra was a prophetess and she had visions and no one believed her. And had they believed her, countless lives would have been saved, but nobody did. And in the end of this book, rather than the way the series has otherwise progressed, which is like, oh yeah, here are like some fun elements of these myths that are like put into the book, this book walks up with a shovel and goes, hey, Cassandra myth, pong. It's so in your face, and the extra problem is that I'm reading it and these characters are being like, nobody is going to believe you, and I'm like, what? Why? It is far more logical and reasonable that these characters believe her. Why are you saying no one is going to believe her? And they do that multiple times. That scene repeats multiple times, and again, shovel just thwacking it. And I'm like, but why? So that was a little bit weird. It's the first time that this series really has felt kind of captive to the myth that it's retelling, which wasn't great, but you know, it's a couple of scenes at the end. You can just speed over them. Eventually, other things will happen.
So now is the point where we're going to go into that little bit of a spoiler section that we mentioned. Like, normally we don't do spoils, but Gretchen wanted to talk about, like, especially because we were talking about all of these negative aspects of this book, she wanted to talk about why this book really grasped her and made her want to read the next one. Totally fine. If you don't want spoils, you can feel free to leave because she'll just wrap up the video at the end. Gretchen has romance content almost every single Monday. When she doesn't do romance content, she does nonfiction content. So be sure to come back. We have our reading challenge video that came out earlier. So if you want to see some of the things that we might be reading together this year, you can go see that. But we'll be doing videos together as well. And you can always watch Gretchen on her own. So again, we're going to go into that spoiler section. If you don't want to hear it, feel free to leave. We don't mind. And we'll see you again soon. For the folks who want to hear why Gretchen really liked the ending to this book, it might be worth listening along.
Okay, this is the spoils. This is your last warning. But I have got to talk about this. I cannot get away with not talking about this. Okay, so one of the fun things about this series is that Katie Robert has the series planned out multiple books in advance. So if you follow her on social media or you are a follower of her Patreon, like Michaela is, you get these lists and like upcoming things. And so we know that the next book, book 5, is going to be a polycule involving Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Adonis, and Pandora. Now, you meet all of these characters if you haven't already met them, because we've met Aphrodite in earlier books, in this book. I have limited feelings on Adonis and Pandora. But when Hephaestus originally shows up in the beginning of this book, he is an older dude. And I'm like, okay, they're giving this character very, very little screen time for someone who is going to be the romantic lead in the next book. Like, this is really, really weird. That's because that Hephaestus done get murdered. So the thing that this book is leading up to, and it kind of is like almost a Chekhov's gun situation, knowing about Cassandra's family's past, is there is this rule that almost no one knows about, which is that if you murder a member of the 13, you get to take their place. And it turns out that this entire house party is a literal game of Clue. The people under the Minotaur's care are trying to kill one of the members of the 13 in the kitchen with a candlestick, however they can get that to happen. And in the end, Theseus, who proved that he is an asshole in the last book, proves that he is an asshole again in this book, murders Hephaestus and becomes the new Hephaestus, who will now be in a relationship with Aphrodite and some other connection, Adonis and Pandora, in the next book. And I'm reading this and I'm like, I do not understand how after 2 books where this character has been shown to not be a good guy, I am supposed to now read book 5, which is called Cruel Seduction, and be willing to root for him in any way. I don't know what's going to happen. I do not know how they're going to make that work. There's also 4 people involved in this polycule, and it will be really hard for me to believe that one of them finds a redeeming quality in this man, let alone potentially more than one of them. I am confused. One of the things, and Michaela brought this up earlier, is that Katie Robert really likes to do complicated characters. She has series of books. For example, she did a series of books on making Disney villains into kind of, I guess, the anti-heroes of their own romance novels, where they actually get the girl. Some of those characters aren't great people either, but, you know, those are really dark romances. So I don't know if this series is about to take another like hard shift in tone and get kind of down to that kind of dark romance that she's written before. I don't know if this character is going to be magically redeemed somehow. I don't know if that's possible. All I know is I have got to read the next book. The only thing I took away from book 4 essentially is I need book 5. I need to understand how this is going to happen. So, Michaela and I have reviewed every book in this series so far, and I don't see us stopping. So I cannot wait to eventually get to Cruel Seduction, which is coming out later this year, and then do a review for you guys where we finally like see how this is supposed to work, because I'm confused. With that monologue over, Michaela already did a bunch of the closeout stuff, so I'm not going to bother repeating that because she already did a great job. If you're still here, thanks for listening to me lose my mind a little bit about this book. And I do show up on my own where I monologue and lose my mind almost every Monday. And you can check back for more of that or more Betwixt content when we have that done for you guys. We will see you then. Bye!